My mother-in-law tried to ruin my wedding, so I exposed her secret at the rehearsal dinner. I had always known that Patricia Holloway did not like me. She was never loud about it. She was too polished for that. Patricia was the kind of woman who smiled at you with her whole face while saying something that took you 3 hours to realize was an insult. She wore pearls to casual brunches. She corrected people's grammar at dinner parties. And from the very first night her son Daniel brought me home to meet her, she had looked at me the way someone looks at a stain on an expensive tablecloth. Noticeable. Unwelcome. Something to be dealt with. My name is Claire, and this is the story of the night I stopped being polite about it. Daniel and I met in graduate school in Nashville. He was getting his MBA. I was finishing a master's in architecture. We met at a study group that neither of us actually needed. We were both just looking for an excuse to be in the same room. By the end of that semester, we were inseparable. Daniel was warm and funny and honest in a way that felt rare. He called his grandmother every Sunday. He remembered small details, the name of your childhood dog, the coffee order you mentioned once in passing. He was the kind of person who made you feel like the most interesting person in any room, and he did it without even trying. His mother had raised him almost entirely on her own after his father left when Daniel was 9. I respected that, genuinely. I understood that their bond was deep and particular, and that walking into it as the woman Daniel had chosen required patience and care. I had both. I offered both. It wasn't enough. Patricia's disapproval had a specific texture to it. It was never about anything concrete, never about my values or my character or anything real. It was always adjacent, sideways, the way she emphasized your family when discussing the wedding guest list, like my family was a separate and lesser category of people. The way she asked about my career in architecture with just enough pause before the word career to make it sound like she was being generous, calling it that. The way she told Daniel, within earshot of me at Christmas, that she just wanted to make sure he had thought everything through. Everything through. I was everything. Daniel always defended me. That part was never in question. He saw what she was doing, and he addressed it directly, and she would soften for a few weeks before the current started pulling again in the same direction. But the wedding brought out something different in Patricia, something that stopped being subtle. The planning started 14 months before the date. We had agreed, Daniel and I, clearly and early, that we wanted a small, intentional wedding, 80 guests, an outdoor venue outside Nashville with string lights and a live guitarist, and food that actually tasted good. Nothing performative, nothing for show. Patricia had a different vision. She wanted 240 guests, a ballroom at the Hermitage Hotel downtown, a 10-piece band, and a seating chart that prioritized her social circle in a way that would have put my parents at a table near the back of the room. When Daniel told her no, she told him she was just trying to help. When I told her no, she told Daniel I was being difficult. Over the following months, she made 3 separate attempts to contact our venue coordinator directly. I only found out because our coordinator, a wonderful woman named Bethany, called me after the second time to give me a heads up. After the third call, Bethany very professionally told Patricia that all communication needed to go through me and Daniel. Patricia told Daniel that Bethany had been rude to her. She pulled Daniel's aunts into it, women I had never done anything to, who began sending Daniel concerned text messages about whether he was sure about the timeline, the venue, the whole thing. Whether he had given this enough thought. There it was again. That phrase. Enough thought. I stayed calm. I kept planning. I told myself that after the wedding, after the papers were signed and the thing was done, the dynamic would shift. It had, too, because once I was legally family, I couldn't be treated as a variable anymore. I believed that, and then, 6 days before the wedding, I found out about the secret. It came from an unlikely source. Daniel's aunt Roberta, not one of the concerned text. Aunts, but a quieter woman who had always been kind to me, called me on a Wednesday evening. Her voice was careful in the way that voices get when someone is about to say something they've been sitting on for too long. She told me that Patricia had been making phone calls. Specifically, she had called 4 of Daniel's closest friends, groomsmen, men who had known Daniel since college, and told them a story. The story was that I had been unfaithful to Daniel early in our relationship, that there had been someone else, that she had it on good authority, and that she felt they deserved to know before they stood up at that altar and celebrated something built on dishonesty. It was a lie, a complete, deliberate, constructed lie. There had been no one else. There had never been anyone else. The timeline she described wasn't even possible. During the period she referenced, Daniel and I had been living together for 3 months. Roberta said she hadn't believed it, but she'd heard from one of the groomsmen that the calls had shaken him, that there had been a conversation among the group. I sat on my kitchen floor after that call, and I held the phone in my lap for a long time. Daniel was at a work dinner. I didn't call him. Not yet. I needed to think first. Here is what I knew. If I told Daniel that night, it would become a conversation about his mother versus his fiancée 4 days before our wedding. It would be emotional and exhausting, and Patricia would deny everything. And we would walk into the rehearsal dinner carrying that weight. If I said nothing, she would know she could do this, that there were no consequences, that she could reach into our life with both hands and rearrange things, and I would absorb it quietly and keep moving. Neither of those options was acceptable. So I made a third choice. I started making my own calls. 2 of the 4 groomsmen confirmed what Roberta had told me. They were apologetic. They said they hadn't believed it, not really, but they hadn't known what to do with it. I told them I appreciated their honesty. I told them I was going to handle it. Then I called Roberta back and asked her one question. Was there anything Patricia would not want discussed publicly? The pause that followed was very long, and then Roberta sighed and said, "There's something she has kept from this family for over 20 years. Patricia Holloway had spent Daniel's entire childhood presenting herself as a self-made woman. The narrative was consistent and practiced. Her husband had left with nothing. She had rebuilt from the ground up. She had sacrificed everything to give Daniel the life he had. It was the foundation of her identity. It was why she held herself the way she did. That particular posture of a woman who has earned the right to judge. What was not part of the narrative was the inheritance. When Patricia's own mother passed in 2001, she had left behind a substantial estate, property, accounts, assets totaling somewhere near $800,000. Patricia had received the majority of it. She had used it to buy the house, fund Daniel's private school education, and establish the comfortable life she had built. None of that was the story she told. The story she told was sacrifice and survival. The story she told erased an inheritance that had given her a foundation most people never get. The family, Daniel's aunts, cousins, the people who had heard the story for 2 decades, did not know. Daniel did not know. I wrote everything down. I verified what I could through Roberta. And I walked into the rehearsal dinner on Friday evening with a folded piece of paper in my clutch and the calmest feeling I have had in my entire adult life. The rehearsal dinner was at a private room, in a restaurant in East Nashville. 60 people. Round tables with candles. Exactly the kind of intimate evening that Patricia had spent months trying to replace with something larger and more impressive. She looked beautiful, as she always did. Pearls, a champagne-colored dress. She greeted people at the door like it was her event. Toasts began after dinner. Daniel's best man went first. Funny, warm, the kind of speech that makes everyone in the room remember why they showed up. There was laughter, and there were a few tears, and Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. Then Patricia stood up. She had not been asked to give a toast. This was not a surprise. She spoke for 4 minutes about Daniel's childhood, his character, his resilience. She spoke about what she had sacrificed to raise him. She looked at me once, just once, with that same expression I had been receiving for 3 years. The tablecloth look. She ended by saying that she hoped Daniel had found someone who truly deserved him. She sat down to polite applause, and I stood up. There was a small moment of surprise. People weren't sure if I had planned to speak here. Daniel looked at me with a question on his face. I touched his shoulder and smiled at him, and I meant that smile completely. Then I turned to the room. I thanked everyone for being there. I talked briefly about what Daniel meant to me, not for long, not performing, just true. I saw some of the groomsmen watching me carefully, and I held eye contact with them for a moment, just long enough. Then I said I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge Patricia. She looked pleased. I said that Patricia had built a remarkable life, that she had given Daniel a stable home and a strong education, and instilled in him the values that made him the man I was marrying, that she should be proud of that.